I think the world is getting tired of fiat. They're getting tired of the dollar being used against them. That's why I think the global South has created BRICS. They're creating a currency backed with gold, and China and India and every other country is buying up gold and silver. And guess who isn't? The
Yeah.
United States. We're the ones not following the world trend. And if you just look at global trends, man, it is very clear that one, the dollar's in trouble, and two, we're moving back to some form of gold standard, and I think it's going to be a digital gold standard. And starting in November of last year, you will see that the amount of debt that the Federal Reserve has been buying has been exponentially increasing since November, and it hasn't really slowed down. The desire for U.S. Treasuries is at its lowest, and a lot of that has to do with BRICS nations. China's throwing away their debt. Our biggest debt holder right now is Japan, and it wasn't Japan before, it was China. And the reason why Japan is our biggest debt holder is because they had zero interest rates.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to My Two Sats. My name is CJK, and today I'm joined by Daniel Diaz of Citizens for Sound Money. Daniel, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
For those of you who don't know, Citizens for Sound Money is probably one of the most important things going on in this country right now across every single state. It's a big move for sound money, and we're going to dig deep into it and see what Daniel's been working on and the successes that they've had. But it's a tradition on my show, Daniel, to start out the show by asking you, when did you get your first orange pill? And maybe in your case scenario, it's a sound money pill. Maybe we went from red pill to orange pill. But lay it out for us. Let us know how it all started for you.
Yeah, so I'll start with just my background. I'll keep it real short because I think my background will kind of inform your viewers on why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So I'm a first generation Cuban American, and I heard stories from my youth about how we had all this property, land, businesses. It was all taken away by the communist regime. And when my family fled Cuba, they confiscated literally everything except for the clothes on their back. And if it wasn't for family and friends in Miami, they would have been on the streets. My grandfather had a construction company in Cuba, and when he got to Miami, he had to start from the bottom, pouring cement for sidewalks. It started in 1965. From the 60s through the 80s, he worked up through that construction company, bought the construction company, sold it in the 80s, and then left an inheritance for our family. So I basically dedicated my life at the age of 16 to prevent what happened to my family's country to happen in my country, because America provided all these opportunities so that my family could rebuild their wealth and everything that was stolen from them by the communist regime. So from the age of 16 till even recently, I took a few sabbaticals here and there to get my master's and work in finance. But for the most part, I've always been involved in political consulting. I've worked on everything from municipal campaigns all the way up to presidential and everything in between. I ran super PACs for years. So my background is political consulting, and also with that, I had director of marketing. So I was always been an entrepreneur. And during COVID, I did jujitsu, hurt my back. I couldn't really continue running my printing business, so I started a car rental business, and I had a business partner. We had a couple other side businesses during COVID, and she came to me and she's like, "Hey, we should buy Bitcoin." Now, this is about March of 2020, when Bitcoin was around 3,500 or $5,000. I said, "No, absolutely not." I mean, I was trained. I got my Series 7, and I was trained, that the fiat economy, the world runs on it, and there's nothing backing Bitcoin. So for months, she'd be like, "We should buy Bitcoin. We should buy Bitcoin." Like, no, 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 no. Then she teamed up with my buddy Dan, who's also a Bitcoiner. And I said, "Look, stop." Around September, I'm like, "Stop talking to me about Bitcoin. I'm never going to invest." And then my buddy Dan called me. He's like, "Hey, bro, let me come over and show you two videos. If after these two videos you're not convinced about crypto and blockchain, we stop talking to you." I didn't even need to watch the second video. The first video was Don Tapscott on how blockchain is changing the world. And it was a great talk. I mean, and what got me wasn't all the technology. It wasn't, all the freedom did pique my interest. But what really got me was the immutability. And when he gave an example of how we might be able to put land titles and deeds onto the blockchain to prove ownership of assets. And he gave a story about Nicaragua during the Contra era, where the communists were there, and how they would destroy land deeds and titles, get on trucks with guns, go to the property with point the guns at the property owner and say, "Hey, this deed and title says my friend owns this, not you. You need to get off. I don't care what yours says. And they would get off. And when I heard that you could put the land deeds and titles in the blockchain to prove ownership, I mean, a light bulb went off. I'm like, holy cow. If we had blockchain technology in the 50s, we could prove today that the businesses and the land, and the farmland my family owned, and if we ever overthrew the communist regime, we'd have evidence and proof that we could either get reparations or get the land back. So I realized that blockchain technology could provide more freedom economically, politically, and personally than any political activity of man. Since then, I've come to realize you can't. The world is run by politics, so you can't completely ignore it. I mean, yeah, if you want to do a whole small anarchy, little island, private island, and just transact and do whatever you want, that's one thing. But to operate in the real world, you have to be involved politically so that we can achieve that freedom through blockchain technology. So I that was, let's just go back to my story. That was in September of 2020. By October, I bought my first Bitcoin and started dabbling in crypto. I wanted to learn how crypto was made, so I went down the whole rabbit hole of crypto mining. By November, I had a whole Ethereum mining rig. And by January, I had started a crypto mining and blockchain consulting company in January of 2021 called Mining Life LLC. And the rest is history. Well, eventually in 2022, I invested in some NFTs. I more than doubled my money. And December, I wanted to figure out how to prevent NFTs from going to zero. So a developer friend of mine launched a project called Meta Gold Miners Club, where it was a gold-backed NFT that will provide a yield in Bitcoin and gold if you learn about financial literacy and sound money principles. I didn't know anything about sound money principles at the time other than the Bitcoin. So I looked for an organization that provided that education. And that's where Citizens for Sound Money came along. And we partnered together. After they interviewed me, they were impressed with the idea and the project. And then during that time, this was April of last year of 2023, we heard about a piece of legislation trying to make transactional gold and silver legal in the state of Texas. So I'm like, hey, I don't mind volunteering my political contacts and reaching out to my people in Austin and see if we can push this along. So I volunteered my time lobbying for this bill. And Citizens for Sound Money was so impressed. They hired me and they offered me a position as their fundraiser and legislative director. 5 months later, they offered me to become the executive director on October 1st. So it's a little over my 1 year anniversary of being the executive director of the organization. And since then, we have gone full blown lobbying, trying to push the Sound Money Act, which does primarily three things. It makes gold and silver legal tender. And why just gold and silver, not Bitcoin? Well, the Constitution only allows states to make gold and silver legal tender. In Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution basically says states can only make gold and silver coin tender for the payment of debts. And that's it. Um, and that's the first part of the legislation. The second part of the legislation is getting rid of all tax liabilities, capital gains, sales tax on the purchase and sale of gold and silver. And then the third thing is making it electronic transfer, making gold and silver backed 1-to-1 legal tender as well. And then the fourth part of the bill, which we got a lot of resistance, which we kind of separated, and we'll push it if there's some political appetite by the Treasury to do these things. But we're wanting to make it mandatory for at least 1% of the state's reserve funds to be invested into gold and silver to protect the state's assets. We prefer 10%, but man, that's a big pill to swallow for a lot of treasurers. So, but that's the Sound Money Act. And last year, with our group of partners, of organizations that are pushing legal tender, that includes Sound Money Defense League, Economic War Room, and the Missouri Freedom Initiative. We covered 27 states that had some form of sound money legislation, whether it was the full Sound Money Act or just getting rid of sales tax or capital gains. Of those 27 states, 7 states passed something, and only one state, Louisiana, made gold and silver legal tender. So we have 6 total states now that have a form of gold and silver as legal tender, whether it's U.S. Minted coins or foreign coins, and I think only one state makes bullion legal tender as well.
I'm gonna pull up that list right now because the work that you guys have been doing has been, I mean, absolutely amazing. And you guys heard in Daniel's testimony that this work hasn't been going on that long. Daniel just kind of really entered the scene in the last cycle. And you guys can go and check out the citizensforsoundmoney.org website, take a look at all of their content, take a look at how they're doing in each and every state where they've had success. So how many states, Daniel, are have passed this legislation, and what does it mean when the state is taking a look at this? Like, what is that conversation? Like, make me the fly on the wall. What are these treasurers' mindsets?
So every legislature is different. Some are more receptive, some are a lot more difficult. And there's a lot, I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of corruption in government, even in the United States. And not blatant corruption where you're getting bribes, right? Like we have a legal bribing system that's called the PAC system. If you can give as much money to a leadership PAC or a political action committee for a candidate, and that's how we can legally bribe. It's not a bribe, but it's our political process. So, but what I mean by corruption is using good bills that could help people and leveraging it for their own personal agendas and personal reasons. And that is what's happened in almost every single state we lobbied in. Every state that we brought the Whole Sound Money Act, it was always amongst all of our organizations. It was the same story on the challenges. It's always one of three people that have killed this legislation, whether it's capital gains sales tax, legal tender, depository. It's either the governor through a veto, like in Idaho and in New Jersey, but New Jersey just came around and I think overturned the veto maybe because they're in the seventh state. There was only six, and then maybe a month ago in New Jersey, nice. They have a long session and they pass. I think got rid of sales tax or capital gains, one of the two. Or it's a Speaker of the House. For instance, in Missouri, the Speaker of the House lied to me the second to last day before session. He told myself and Patrick Holland from the Missouri Freedom Initiative that the Sound Money Act, or the Constitutional Money Act in Missouri, as it was called, would be coming up at 10 a.m. the last day of session and brought up for a vote. We whipped the entire House. We got it through the Senate. I spent 2 full months in Missouri, and we worked hard to get it out of the Senate. That was a battle. Then we got it out of the Senate the week before it was going to be heard on the House floor. On the last 2 weeks, we got this through. And he did nothing. He lied to our faces and just let the bill die because he wanted something. The Senate died because it filibusters. So because of he didn't even care. He didn't care that it would help Missourians or help the state. Because his political because it wasn't politically convenient anymore to use the Constitutional Money Act to get his legislation through. They killed it. So
it wasn't really about sound money then. There wasn't like an anti-sound money. It's more of a personal thing. Like, here's my agenda. Here's the promises I've made. And since this isn't helping me accomplish anything here, this is a waste of my time.
And every state that we lobbied in and we actually took the temperature or met with legislatures for committees in the House, we always had a majority of the House and the Senate in each state that wanted to pass it. But it was always leadership. Leadership controls. If you don't understand the political process, those three people, Speaker of the House, Senate President, and the governor, they control everything that happens in the legislature. If they don't want a piece of legislation to go through, they won't let it go through. If they do, they'll push it right through.
Wow.
So 100% of this is education. Now, granted, a lot of the resistance is that they don't understand the impact on the state, and there were also fiscal impact notes. These are when you have a piece of legislation, there might be a fiscal impact. The committees, research analysts put together what they think it might cost the state or benefit the state financially. Well, they assume that they're going to have to deal with all the physical gold and silver, so they put these bloated tens of millions of dollars to implement gold and silver as legal tender. And like, for example, it was like over $70 million in Missouri, but we were able to cut down to only 800,000 because of a public-private partnership where private companies will do all this saying, because they already do that. They'll say gold and silver, and instead of giving the person the gold and silver when they bring it in, if they make it legal tender and accept gold and silver for payment of debts, they can, and they don't want to receive gold and silver, they can take it to a location that is authorized to the state, bring your gold, and then they just remit the taxes and fees to the state versus the individual. So there's no difference for the company. They're taking all the costs of a saying. They already do that for business. It just makes a perfect sense to bring the private sector and government together to bring back a sound money economy. So that is kind of the direction we're moving now. We split the Sound Money Act up into 4 bills. Those 4 parts, we separated it so each part is different, which was a great strategy that Missouri had, which we're copying. They basically split the Constitutional Money Act the year before into 5 different bills, and by the end of the session, there were 7 bills, and we got 2 of them through to the House and the Senate to the House floor on the last day of session. So,
now, guys, if you can't tell already, here's Daniel's Twitter. Look, he only has 966 followers, which I personally believe is absolutely disgusting. This man is in the middle of the fight. You know what? He doesn't have time to send out memes and tweets because he is fighting the real fight in the hallways with the politicians, doing all of the educational components, doing all of the things that need to be done to bring real change across in this country. So please go right now, follow him, go on Citizens for Sound Money, make a donation, support what's going on here, because the first step with sound money is gold and silver because it's in the Constitution. So I'm curious, when you talk to some of these politicians, it seems like it's really just those 3 important people you were talking about. Do they care that it's in the Constitution? Like, is that one of your main talking points? Like, hey, look, this is already legal. You just have to come and back up the Constitution.
Typically, when we meet with legislators, most of them don't understand how the economy works. They don't understand how fiat works. That we were on a gold and silver standard, and getting off of that created inflation. So we typically meet with legislators for 15 minutes, typically max, unless they're super intrigued and they push back the other appointments and they want to keep talking. So the first 10 minutes is educating them. Like, and it's literally educating them on monetary policy, the effects of inflation, how much inflation has been accrued since we got off the gold standard in 1971 with the Bretton Woods, and showing them what like 260 ounces of gold could buy in 1978, an average house, and basically you can buy a bigger house with the 268 ounces of gold, because gold maintains its purchasing power. And there's a bunch of different examples. So, but it's constantly trying to let them understand gold has maintained its purchasing power and the dollar hasn't. And we compare gold, oil prices of houses, and just $20, right? $20 in 1910 could buy you a top hat, tuxedo, shirt, shoes, pocket watch, chocolates, and flowers for your date. What can $20? Because back then $20 was an ounce of gold. What can you buy with $20 today? Maybe a good Chick-fil-A meal, maybe. But what can an ounce of gold get you? Well, if with an ounce of gold, I can buy a top hat, shirt, tuxedo, pocket watch, shoes, chocolate, and flowers for my date.
Do the light bulbs go off when they see that relationship? Are they surprised? Are they like, what's like the natural, typical reaction of someone who's like, I never thought about this. I don't really understand. This is amazing. Like, why aren't more people talking about this?
Intrigues a lot of people. But the thing with the legislature, guys, they have hundreds of issues, thousands of bills. So they know a lot, but very little. It's like an inch deep, a mile wide. So they know a little bit about a lot of things, but this is monetary policy. If they aren't in finance, like if they're a teacher or if they're a farmer, coming into and understanding finance needs more education. So that's why we've launched through our C3, our Sound Money Academy, and we have legislative dinners and luncheons that we're going to start pushing and trying to bring everybody, because we did this in Florida and we had 30 or 40 legislators show up, and all of them were on board once we did this 45-minute presentation on the history of money in the United States, the history of gold and silver, and what is money. and then the problem, the solution. And that right there really helped us, because when we went to those legislators' offices, it wasn't us trying to explain monetary policy. It was more, what's the state of the bill, what's going on, share the details about the bill. So for those who are listening, if you want to help us with our legislative efforts, especially if you're in Florida or one of the states that we're targeting, call your legislator and tell them, hey, I want to make gold and silver legal tender. Reach out to Citizens Sound Money for more information. And then if the legislators or their office reaches out to us, that's great. We can educate them before we meet with them. But one of the major problems we hear is, from the people who say no or not interested, is they never heard it was an issue for their constituents. So if you care about sound money, you want to see a sound money come back, call your House reps in the state level and your state senators and say, hey, I want sound money back. I want gold and silver as legal tender. Because the more people who call their legislators, the more they realize, look, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If nobody's calling and saying, this is an issue I want solved, it's not going to happen. It's not going to come to the top of the list of importance for the legislators.
There we go, guys. So send out a few less memes and make a few more calls. And when you do, people like Daniel can be that much more effective. And so Citizens for Sound Money, which states have you successfully passed these bills, and which are the next 3 states that you think are the most probable, or are the states that you're targeting?
So the Sound Money Act in its entirety, nobody has passed it, because for us, the electronic version is extremely important, because we have 6 states now that have made gold and silver legal tender. And it's a nominal impact, because nobody carries bags of gold and silver coins, right? So now it's great for stackers, people like me who buy and sell gold and silver coins and bars and everything. For the gold and silver bug community that are in those 6 states, it's great. We understand that, we know it. But the overwhelming majority are not stackers. They're not collecting gold and silver coins. So it hasn't penetrated. So right now, not a single state has passed all parts. 6 have passed legal tender. All but 4 have gotten rid of sales tax. I think there's 10 or 12 states that still have state capital gains tax on gold and silver.
Wow.
And not a single one. One state has a depository. I think Tennessee or Kentucky's building a depository. Texas has a depository, I think I said. And that's it. Nobody has electronic currency. So right now, with the way everything is going now, with BRICS announcing the 40% gold-backed currency, Russia is starting to buy silver. We're starting to see silver going up, gold going up. I really do think the future of the economy, I think the fiat economy is dead. I think that this is the end of the old New World Order, and a new World Order is going to be coming in. I think that New World Order is real world assets, digital real world assets, currencies backed by gold, silver, real estate, maybe even natural resources like the Great Barrier Reef, and selling the carbon cleaning aspects of, say, a rainforest, in mixing it with currencies. I mean, I just tried to do a gold purchase yesterday, and banks don't have cash. It is so hard now to do a cash deal, because banks just don't carry the cash anymore. If you want to buy $25,000 of gold, or silver in cash, dude, good luck. You got to order cash ahead of time, like a week ahead of time. You got to call your bank or call multiple branches and try to collect all the cash, because they don't want it. They don't want to use cash anymore. They're moving away from it. And it's so difficult. And to me, that's dangerous that we don't have a cash component, because the cash is freedom, right? I don't want the government knowing every aspect of my spending. It's none of their business what I do with my money when it comes to, like, the cash aspect. If I want to buy food with cash, if I want to buy gold and silver with cash, look, man, it's none of your business, right? Look, they have an interest in interstate commerce, right? Weights and measures, but government has gotten way too big and meddling too much in our private lives.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I challenge anybody out there, go to the bank without making an appointment and try to take out $20,000. Actually, just try to take out $10,000. The teller will look at you and be like, there's a set, sir, we can't do that. You need to make an appointment. Let you talk to the bank manager. And they have to work all these things together. And when you look at what happened back, not in this March, but the previous March during the crisis, the banking crisis, the bank term funding program had a pop up because they took the cash that you did deposit and they bought government securities, which then got their rates raised and the assets were not equaling the liabilities. So
No.
literally, it's not even just about not having the cash. It's that everything has pretty much already turned digital, except
Yeah.
they want to go the digital CBDC route where they can track and trace everything. And, that's one thing about Bitcoin where it's like, hey, Bitcoin is 100% trackable and traceable. So I think that's an interesting dynamic here. And I wonder where your thoughts are. First, the question is this: gold and silver, are they the Trojan horse that really opens up the door to Bitcoin and other real world assets that equity will be unlocked and then tradable within that ecosystem? Is this the starting point? And then if so, how fast do you think Bitcoin can start to work its way into that conversation with gold and silver?
I think it is the Trojan horse because just look at what the rest of the central banks are doing, and look at what Basel Basel three, or is it Basel or Basel?
Yeah, Basel three. Yep.
Basel three. They've elevated gold to almost like a currency, holding it as reserves for banks. The head of the BIS even said that it's interesting over the last year that gold has been acting more as a currency than it has a commodity. This is the head of the BIS, which is basically like the central bank of Europe and so forth. So I definitely think gold and silver. And then look, the first country to make a real world asset currency backed by gold legal tender is Zimbabwe. They're backing it with at least 40% gold and a bunch of different currencies and other assets. And BRICS is looking to do the same thing. There's a theoretical threshold that if you back a currency with at least 40% gold, it stabilizes the fluctuations of other assets back in that currency. So I definitely do think that this is the Trojan horse. I think blockchain technology has changed the face of the future. I think blockchain technology, which has allowed the tokenization of real world assets and the transfer of digital ownership without a central entity. Now, mind you, the banks are going to have centralized blockchains. You have the ISO 2022. You have pretty much all the major blockchain companies that have worked to develop the ISO 2022, like Quant, Algorand, Ripple, like all these other companies, and they've essentially created the rails for CBDCs to be transferred instantaneously around the world to any central bank and even your accounts. Um, and I think the world is getting tired of fiat. They're getting tired of the dollar being used against them. That's why I think the global South has created BRICS. They're creating a currency back with gold, and China and India and every other country is buying up gold and silver. And guess who isn't? The
Yeah.
United States. We're the ones not following the world trend. And if you just look at the global trends, man, it is very clear that one, the dollar's in trouble, and two, we're moving back to some form of gold standard, and I think it's going to be a digital gold standard.
Yeah, to me, it seems like gold is being remonetized, and that's the result of the abuse of the dollar system. Uh, massive amounts of inflation, but not only just inflation, taking away Russia's reserves and weaponizing the dollar. Um, all of these things, and what my position is this as a Bitcoiner: the main difference between gold and Bitcoin is that Bitcoin doesn't require trust. So I think when you look at some of these countries who want to use gold, it's like that halfway point. It's like, okay, the people are starting to wake up to this inflation gimmick where we can just print money and steal their wealth. But if we go
Yeah.
full Bitcoin, then we can't do shit. But if
Yeah.
we go tokenized gold, we can still have a floating rate. We can still print a little bit if we need it. But like you said, it's that theoretical 40% threshold that helps create a layer of trust, which then affords a layer of stability. But in
Yeah.
your opinion, is the natural progression from a trust-based system to a trustless-based system the road that we're on right now, or do you think it's gold? Tokenized gold is gonna fill that void.
I think that the systems that is going to be created, or it's already created, just needs to be deployed, is a centralized system. It's going to be like Coinbase, Binance, whatever. They have control of the digital assets. And to get it off that chain. I don't know. I really don't know how they're gonna do it. But it's definitely going to be centralized. Look, one of the major problems, we have a partner. I don't want to name their that company, but they have a digital a gold and silver token, and they've been trying for the better part of a couple of years, trying to get into banks, and neobanks so that they can use their tokens. The problem is they couldn't get any banks to approve because they have no control. It's a completely decentralized solution, and it's too much of a risk for traditional banking. So they completely revamped and created a new centralized gold and silver token that they can reverse if there's fraud involved. So I think that is the direction that the entire world is going. It's going to be the nightmare that we were thinking was going to be a centralized digital token. And but if we make gold and silver legal tender along with electronic gold and silver legal tender like our legislation states, then we have a dual monetary system. We have true freedom, which is gold and silver, physical, and the way that our legislation is written is decentralized private gold and silver tokens as legal tender. So that is the freedom. And then if they go to that CBD system or we stay in the fiat system, that's a parallel Federal Reserve system. So we're unique in America where we only have one currency that we deal with. Every other country in the world deals with two currencies. Canada deals with the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. Right? Mexico, the peso and the dollar. I mean, most of South America deals with the dollar and the peso. Argentina deals with like five currencies. So we're unique because we've been the world reserve currency, and we've been in a generation where we've never had to worry about another currency. By making gold and silver a secondary currency within the states, we now are in line with the rest of the world, and we can start pricing things in both currencies, gold and silver, and then the fiat that they create.
Now, I think a lot of people, when they think of the word government, they kind of fail to understand the difference between state and federal. How do you see the relationship between state and federal, specifically when it applies to monetary policy?
In the United States, we're the only country in the world that allows the individual provinces or states or counties, or I think that's what they're called in the UK, to make monetary policy. So we're a unique country. So the states are we're the United States of America. Every single state is essentially its own country, united through this compact called the Constitution. So the states throughout our history, especially a Supreme Court precedent, have complete and autonomy over economic matters within their borders. Complete autonomy, except for making bills of credit and their own printing their own currency, except for gold and silver. And there's arguments there that there's two legal views. The state can mint their own gold and silver coins, and the state can't mint their own silver coins. They can just recognize privately minted gold and silver coins, or even currencies backed by gold and silver as legal tender. I'm actually started getting into and dabbling with old U.S. Currency notes, and back in the 19th century, there were a lot of banks that created their own currency. Bank of America $5 bill, $1 bill, $20 bill that were backed by gold and silver. And that is something that we've been doing in the past. And the Supreme Court ruled that the states, by recognizing privately minted currency or printed currency backed by gold and silver, is legal tender. So if that is the precedent, I think it was a court case in 1863. It was the Bank of Kentucky versus the United States. I guess it was. I forget or Nebraska. I forget. I have a list of the court cases, but there are four Supreme Court cases that really highlight the authority of the state to make something legal tender that's backed by gold and silver. And that is what I think is extremely unique. I think the United States is in a strong position to lead the world in making gold and silver legal tender and um rising back to the top, right? Because we became a superpower, one, because people were nations were sending their gold during World War One, especially World War Two, to protect it from the Nazis and the Germans, the Nazis and the Germans, World War One, War Two, and from confiscating during war. And they also needed goods and supplies. We had I think at some point we had 95% of the entire global gold reserves in New York. And that is part of the reason we became such a powerhouse. We had all the money. We gold was money. It is money. Not was, is money. So the way I see the federal government in our constitution can make currency and anything legal tender, and the states subset of that can make any gold and silver legal tender. So I think there's a lot of autonomy and a lot of authority that the states have. In fact, the state can sue the federal government. The state can choose to ignore the federal government and battle it out in the courts. We have a lot of autonomy in this country when it comes to states and states' authority and rights, especially on economic matters. There are very few things economically that the federal government can stop the state from doing. And also through the National Guard and the governor being the chief, commander in chief of the state National Guards and the state militias. In fact, I don't know if you ever heard of a program called Tactical Civics. Have you heard of Tactical Civics?
Haven't heard of it.
It's a phenomenal movement. They're using the Constitution to have counties. My county just did it. Our county just declared it to be a constitutional county, that we will set up in my county grand juries and county militias to arrest and prosecute anybody, doesn't matter if it's the president or the dog catcher, for violating the United States Constitution. And the goal of Tactical Civics is to get 1,500 counties to be declared as constitutional counties. And I think the goal is to get 12 million Americans to join Tactical Civics. And if we do that, we can actually change the country and start enforcing the Constitution and winning back our country. It's all constitutional. So we have a lot of power. We're a very unique country. We are an experiment that our founding fathers created that no other country has been able to replicate. We are the oldest constitution in the world. And it's because we've brought together the monarchy, the republic, and democracy into one form of government. And we also understand the relationship between the states that created the federal government. The federal government has been stripping the rights and authority of the states, but the states really wanted to. They could try to assert their states' rights again, and really look. The states really lost a lot of power when the states could no longer appoint the senator. Right, the Senate was meant to represent the states. Not privilege. The states. What is the word I'm thinking of?
Their constituents, the people.
Not the people, the state government, the interest. So the Senate was. I don't know why I couldn't think of that word. The senators were meant to represent the interests of the state and the state government, because it was either the governor or the state legislature that appointed the Senate. And then the House was supposed to be the common chamber where the people elected. But then, whether you like him or not, Theodore Roosevelt was a big proponent of changing the direct election of the senators to the people versus the legislature, and that right there ended the republic. Now both chambers are the chamber of the people versus one being the state. If you go back to the Constitutional Convention, there was the whole argument, the New Jersey Virginia Compromise, right? The states wanted, the New Jersey wanted one vote, one state, and Virginia wanted people's representation. So they split the difference, and there's two senators representing the state's interests, and then the common people, the Congress, representing the interests of the people. So, I mean,
that is such a great breakdown, and I hope if my listeners don't really understand what Daniel was talking about, that you would dig a little bit deeper and try to figure out how some of this stuff works, because it is your right to know and take advantage of the laws that were set up to empower we the people. And a lot of times, I gotta say for myself personally, when I first started learning about this fight, I felt overwhelmed. I felt like there was nothing we could really do, because I was looking at it from the top down. I was looking at it from the federal government down. Instead, we have to do what Daniel and Citizens for Sound Money is doing, which is going state by state and going from the bottom up. And if we can start at the bottom up with education of we the people, and then phone calls to your legislators, and then educational movements and conferences, this can really catch fire and move up a lot faster. You know, they love to say trickle down economics, right? Because they want you to
Yeah.
think from bottom down. But we, the
Right.
people, should be thinking from bottom up. And when
Yeah.
we do, our chances of turning this thing around, I think, are increased significantly. And you and Citizens for Sound Money are demonstrating that perfectly. Now, I want to transition into the debt. And I want to get your take on the government's current budget deficit, the expected budget deficit, and maybe how sound money can play a role in getting us back to reality.
Yes. So I mean, that's a big topic. What exactly about the debt do you want me to focus on?
So yeah, fair point, because it really is a big topic. So let me make a statement,
Yeah.
and I'll get your opinion on this, because this is a radical statement. I've made this statement on a few shows, but never. The only other guest I ever asked was Lawrence Lepard,
Mm,
and it
I
was
love
very
Lawrence.
interesting. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
great sound money advocate. So,
Yeah.
and that's why I want to bring it up to you, because I know you too are a sound money advocate. So here's the statement. I think that the Treasury has lost the ability to create demand on U.S. Treasuries by raising interest rates.
Yeah.
Now,
100%.
so typically, if you want to sell more, you raise the interest rates, no problem. But they just lowered interest rates, and look what's happening to the 10-year. It's going up. It's going
Hmm.
back up to 5%. And if we get to 5%, the banks will fail again. And if we go beyond 5%, see, they won't let it get to that point. They'll start quantitative easing. So my question is this: have they lost that ability? And then number two, how is sound money going to help us rein this situation back in?
Yeah. So Jerome Powell in April said that the deficit spending that the Treasury and Congress is currently doing every year is unsustainable. This is the head of the Fed. He said this in April. It's unsustainable. And if you look at the numbers of how many the Federal Reserve is supposed to be the lender of last resort, right? So the Treasury sells notes and bonds, and the open market banks, individuals, foreign nations usually buy our debt. When they don't buy our debt, and the government and the Treasury and Congress needs currency, well, the lender of last resort that buys a debt is the Federal Reserve itself. And starting in November of last year, you will see that the amount of debt that the Federal Reserve has been buying has been exponentially increasing since November, and it hasn't really slowed down. The desire for U.S. Treasuries is at its lowest, and a lot of that has to do with BRICS nations. China's throwing away their debt. Our biggest debt holder right now is Japan, and it wasn't Japan before; it was China. And the reason why Japan is our biggest debt holder is because they had zero interest rates for so long. So that people would buy Japanese yen and then lend it, convert it to dollars, and make 4, 5, 6%. And they thought it was great. But then the deflate or the inflationary effects of the yen were so high, people were losing money. It's such a racket. But but yeah, I think that they have lost control. And I think we're gonna see if you go back to 2008, it's almost day for day the exact same thing that has happened. They cut on September 18th of this year. They cut the interest rates by 50 basis points. On September 18th of 2020, 2007, 2007, they cut
Yeah,
interest rates by 50 basis points,
to the
and the
day.
stock and the stock market went up almost identical, like it's going up now. It's called. I was watching an economist on YouTube. He was calling it the rising collapse, where right before a major crash in the markets, there's always a blip up, and then what happened in 2007 was it was 50 basis points, 25 basis points in October, 25 basis points in November, and 25 basis points in December. And then in January, 2 days before the Fed rate meeting, they cut it 125 basis points, and they cut it another 125 basis points again 2 days later. So in the span of a few months, it was like almost 4% that they cut the interest rates. And I think we're going to have a similar situation. Look,
Mm.
and if you look at the news stories of '08 and today, everybody's talking about how the United States has avoided a recession. Explain to me how every other European country and Asian country reporting today saying that they're in a bad recession and we completely skipped out. No, man, this is just the lies and people that don't understand economics. They're hoping that the fiat printing machine is just going to pump everything up, and that's why everything is going up. But isn't it the look? Delete the top 5 companies in the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 is negative. You take away the top 5 companies in the list of 500, and we're actually in negative. You have Nvidia, you have Apple, you have Microsoft, you have Google, and you have, I forget the other, the fifth one. But those 5 companies have been dragging up and keeping the S&P 500 up. All the other companies have lost. Same thing with the Dow Jones, and same thing with the 5,000, the Russell 5,000. You take away the top 5 to 10 companies, the whole thing is negative. It's a bunch. We're in such we're in a hidden recession right now, and eventually it's going to be outright. So look,
Well
I
said. And that's nominal. That's not even in real terms. So if you,
yeah.
it's deeply negative in real terms. But you said something that interested me there, which is because we're following that same path. I mean, it was to the day, and that's just creepy because you're talking about day end points and their mark for mark. So you already said that you think they're going to be forced to lower rates. We're probably thinking that, but you also said that that little bubble comes at the top before you get the big crash. Now, it's my position that we are in an inflationary recession. And that is actually why the recession is masked, because the nominal numbers are still going up, even though real GDP is negative. And what's funny about it is, like you said, the Fed, they started raising the rates for a demand destruction campaign. So you're trying to destroy demand. You're trying to slow the economy. Nobody should be surprised that the economy is slowly contracting when you look at the real numbers. It's
Yeah.
amazing to me that it's almost like mainstream media propaganda, and these people buy it hook, line, and sinker. But the final cherry on top is like the Warren Buffetts and some of the bigger managers who are building that cash position in anticipation for a huge deflationary event. Do you see a deflationary event coming, or do you think it's an up
Oh,
only inflationary thing?
it's gonna hurt. I just did the money matrix, and I said, listen, deflation sucks. It's gonna hurt. We're gonna suffer, but it's necessary. And yes, there's gonna be a major deflationary event. And in fact, I think it could be worse than '08. And some people, like Mike Maloney and others, are saying it could be as bad as the Great Depression. And I don't think it's going to be a short-term recession. I was just listening to somebody driving home, who works for Northwest Mutual, and he's saying that, I think we're actually in a lot worse situation than most people in the mainstream are saying. And see, he said in the next 4 to 6 quarters we're going to be in a moderate recession. I think he's being kind. I think
Mm.
we're going to be in an extremely deep recession, and unless the United States does something and changes the trajectory of the dollar and monetizes the gold in Fort Knox and the other U.S. Mint vaults, and reevaluates the price from $42 an ounce to either the market price, and I've heard as high as $20,000 an ounce. I don't really see the dollar surviving for much longer. I don't think it's going to be immediate collapse. Look, I'm not the world's going to come to an end apocalypse type of prepper, but I do believe economically we're going to see a new world order. I think we're going to get rid of fiat completely, in the sense that fiat backed by nothing, and I think we're going to transition to fiat backed partially by gold, and that's what I'm hoping could happen. This is speculation. I'm hoping that the Trump, when he gets elected, which I'll put money on it. I'm pretty sure he's going to get elected. When he gets elected, I think that just as he was going to use the gold to buy Bitcoin, I think he might get somebody to say, hey, instead of just buying Bitcoin with the gold reserves, how about we back the dollar with it? And back at, say, 10, 20, 30%, or even 40%. Now, mind you, if they reevaluate gold at $20,000 an ounce, that'll give us a little over $5 trillion in liquidity. So I mean, that's not really 40%, but it's something.
Yeah,
And
that's really interesting because, as you know, at People's Reserve, we are working on this very exact issue with our
yes,
bonds, our Bitcoin and gold, silver backed bonds, because dollars, most people think of dollars like, is that dollar backed by anything? First thing they think of is cash. And then the second thing they think of is a bank deposit, but then they don't understand the bank deposit is just a liability on the bank's computer, a little digital liability. And the real asset that's backing that digital liability is government debt. So really, we can back the dollar by strengthening our debt, because it's the debt that backs the actual circulating liabilities. So it's amazing that you said that, to hear somebody who's in the fight, in the hallways, being able to piece the pieces of the puzzle together. But one little counterpoint, because as somebody who is voting for Trump and thinks Trump's going to win and wants Trump to win for the good of the country, exactly, we could free Ross for sure. So I just put this up on my Twitter the other day, because it was the Joe Rogan podcast, and there were a whole bunch of clips, and I didn't see any clips about this.
What an amazing! Did you watch the whole thing?
Oh yeah, every minute.
Oh, dude, he should have been doing this from day one. It humanized him. It humanized him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've heard people from the left say, "Man, he should have been doing this a long time ago," because he was such an elusive figure. People don't know how he thinks. I started seeing the way he thought after he got shot, and I watched the RNC convention. I heard his speech; it made me cry. And that moment, that speech at the RNC convention, when he broke down and said, by the grace of Almighty God, I'm still here. That gave a peek, and it showed you how important family is to him. In that interview, I don't know if you noticed, the first part of the interview, he was talking about family and Abraham Lincoln and Abraham being depressed, and it connected with them. That, to me, is going into his mindset and how important family is to Donald Trump. And that is a humanization that I think most people needed to see. I think it's a little too late. I think this interview should have happened a year ago, and they should have continued to happen throughout the year. I think it wouldn't even be a close race.
I think they learned that from RFK, to be honest, because RFK, he was ostracized from everything. RFK had no choice but to go to the podcasters. He had no choice but to go to the alternative media, because he was zeroed, he was ignored, he was outcast from the mainstream media. And Trump, was outcast, sure, but always misquoted and attacked. And now he's going to the podcasters like RFK did, who ran the most successful independent campaign in our lifetimes and in a long time. And he got that, partnering with him, he started to learn the power of that. And I agree with you. It was a fantastic interview. And he was talking about the Lincoln Room and everything, how the bed was bigger and just little nuances like that make him like a real person instead of a politician with his talking points. I don't think Kamala would have lasted more than 30 minutes on Joe Rogan. She'd
just be laughing the whole time, all uncomfortable and not saying anything. Just a bunch of what do they call it? Verbal soup or something like that. Whatever they're saying.
All filler, no substance. But one thing Trump said during that thing was this surprised me, because he said that Joe asked him about COVID and about paying off the debt and about how his tariff policy and tax cuts, how is that supposed to reduce the deficit? And one thing Trump said was, well, when you think about assets and you think about growth, and that was interesting to me, because that is a little bit of the traditional economist, I think, creeping in on the Donald Trump that you and I know, that has his plane lined with gold, who sold a building for gold, who understands sound money and understands finance and understands the balance sheet. But he conceded a point there, which was, look, I'm going to lower those tax rates, and I'm going to lower it to 15% if they make it in America, and we're going to do more business. In other words, the economy is going to grow, and we're going to have more turnover, more monetary velocity, which means more tax revenue. So I thought it was interesting he was able to connect those dots. And he did say, yeah, we should pay off the debt. But he also said that the assets of the United States, the land, the water, the oil, is so tremendous that 35 trillion is a large number, but it's nowhere near what we actually have on the asset side of our balance sheet. So where do you think he's going to, once he gets in, are we going to see him play a big role in the federal government being less of a blocker, less of an education disruptor when it comes to the state level legislators who are going to have to make these decisions to move towards that sound money standard?
I think you're talking about with Trump leading it. Well, if Trump is doing it, I think,
because he said he would do the Bitcoin strategic reserve.
yeah,
Loomis wants to accumulate Bitcoin, so that has a
yes.
better chance. But other movements like yours and the sound money movement, he can get behind that as well too. So you think there's a chance that he will get behind that and start to accelerate some of these changes to help strengthen the dollar?
So I've heard Trump. One of his economists is Stephen something. He's a conservative economist, and a lot of the school Austrian economists and a lot of the Chicago School of Economics, they're not sound money advocates. They're for lower taxes. They're for a stronger economy. But I've heard Trump talk about economics, and the few times he has mentioned Bitcoin and using a reserve, I haven't heard him say much about gold other than using it to buy Bitcoin and reevaluating it at the Bitcoin 2024 conference. I haven't heard him really speak about sound money economics. I've been really wanting to try to get to somebody who has his ear to really reconsider a sound money economy and going back to some form of gold backing, some form of gold standard. I'm not saying the gold, in my opinion, the gold standard is the solution. It's a solution. I think just making gold and silver itself, letting the rates float and not the government tying a certain value of dollars to an ounce of gold and silver like we used to. It should be a floating standard. It should be the ratio should be natural. The free market's very efficient, even with the manipulation of gold and silver. Yeah, there's manipulation in every market, but I think there are corrections. I think there's um, enough there to make gold and silver legal tender, like what we're trying to do. Now, if Trump does adopt a sound money economy, a sound money standard, a sound money solution, I don't see how a single Republican legislature will ignore that. Especially if we're successful in the state of Florida, which I am very hopeful, especially with the new Senate president and Speaker of the House. The Senate president is very. We met with him last Monday, in Tallahassee, and we did 5% of the talking. He did 90 to 95% of the talking, and he was basically telling his legislative affairs director about the book we gave him about sound money economics, written by Kevin Freeman, called Pirate Money. I think it's the Founding Fathers' Secret Plan to Overthrow the Great Reset or something like that. He told us, I'm intrigued and I'm digging, and man, I, I I've never talked. I haven't talked to a single elected official that has been bitten by the gold and silver bug as much as Senator Benjamin Al Britton. He's intrigued. He is digging and he's reading. And I when we had a luncheon, you came to the luncheon. Remember? I don't
Yeah.
know if you were in the conversation, but every single time he talked about one of his top issues, I've always brought it back to, you know what they have in common? Money.
Sound
And
money.
they're losing value because of this. And that's why the budget keeps going up. And he looked at me. He's like, you're good, you're really good. I wouldn't let him. I was like a bone, like a dog with a bone. I wouldn't let go of the sound money talks, and I kept bringing it back and relating every issue that he brought up that he wants to bring up as Senate president to gold and silver and monetary policy. So I think that right there, because I had an answer to all of his objections and a solution to a lot of his problems, I think that's why he's so intrigued. And I think Florida has a really good shot. And if Florida makes gold and silver legal tender this next legislative session, I think it's going to be the first major domino that falls, and all the other states fall in line. And I think Trump is smart enough, if he sees his state doing that, because Florida is his state. If they make gold and silver legal tender, I think he's going to take a look at that and like, maybe we should do this at the federal level. It might be the opposite. Instead of Trump influencing the states, I think Florida might influence Trump if we get it done.
There we go. See, that's my propaganda mind thinking from the top to the bottom instead of the bottom to the top. But we, as the state, we can set the example not only with the sound money, but with sound debt as well,
Yeah.
where people's reserve
Yes.
comes in with our gold and Bitcoin bonds. So
I would love to invest in a bond and get paid in gold and silver and even Bitcoin. Right? Like
who wouldn't? And it's actually yielding in real positive terms, right?
right.
And then you talk about the programs that you can finance with it. I mean, in the state alone, you're talking about saving millions and millions of dollars per issuance And by the way, attracting hundreds of millions of dollars of more capital into these municipal offerings at a likes that no state has ever seen. But it all starts with what you're doing at Citizens for Sound Money. And Daniel, I'm so thankful for you joining me today, for educating me and my audience about what you're doing. And I want, before I give you your last word, I want to tell the people that follow me, go follow Daniel immediately. Go to Citizens for Sound Money. Support them financially if you can. Do whatever you can to get on the phone with your legislators and let them know that sound money is an issue that is important to you, that you think can bring benefits to yourself and to the overall community. These are the action steps that we can take from today's call. Daniel, thank you so much. And I want to leave you with the last word for the audience.
Absolutely. And if you want to support us and join Citizens for Sound Money, we just launched our Pioneer membership. It's $25 a year. It gets you access to a Boolean aggregator called Metal Markup that scours the internet for the cheapest Boolean rates on gold and silver in Canada and the US. So if you want to be a part and support us, and once we launch our state membership programs, once we have my right now the threshold 50 members in each state, we'll set up a state chapter. We will train you on how to do lobbying, citizen lobbying, and we'll let you know when we're coming to your state. And if we're not coming to your state, we'll train you on how to go and push and lobby for the Sound Money Act or parts of it. So go to citizens the number 4 soundmoney.org and then click on become a member. It's $25 a year. And I think there might be a special if you donate $100. We'll send you 1 digital ounce of silver through the Kinesis.money platform. So,
Guys, it's a no-brainer, $25 a year. All of the links are going to be in the description so you can check it out and easily navigate. Daniel, thank you so much, and I look forward to doing it again.
thank you, CJ.